identify one or two areas in particular that are most concerning at this stage?
Yes.
Can you identify it with us?
No.
Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. Today is Monday, August 19th, and we appreciate you being with us wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether it's on the Spotify network, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, if you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, we appreciate you. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and I apologize already. It's a little late. It's a little late for us. You know, we like to get the show out on Mondays around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock Central, Eastern, wherever it kind of goes out. That's when we'd love to have it in your fingertips. But unfortunately, today I had to do my civic duty, little jury duty. That's also why I have a full button-down shirt on, just trying to look the part, trying to be a little more professional today. But I was struck from the jury, and now I'm here, back doing what I love to do more than anything else. That's talk college football. Mark Kubiak, Jack Foster, Jake Garcia are here as well. Camp is ended. For the most part, everybody's focused on what they have coming up either this weekend in the event and they're playing week 0, or they're starting to look ahead with some of their preparations for week 1. I remember as a player, we used to start basically in reverse. So week 1, we'd go through that weekly prep twice. So today, even though you're 14 days away, 12 days away from the first kick, you're probably going through a Monday install, Monday breakdown, things like that. Tuesday would be regular down and distance, short yardage goal line. Wednesday would be third down and red area, and then Thursday would be 2-minute drill, and then you kind of rinse and repeat as you go through it again next week just to fine-tune the details. So that's kind of what it looks like. So if they're going to be in game week, we might as well be in game week as well. Of course, we're going to preview week 0 a little later in the week. So we are going to listen to some coaches. We're going to kind of interpret, all right, are they telling us something? Is this coach speak? Is this real? We'll do our best to kind of hit on a few of these programs, and we have a lot of news and notes that we need to get to. So without much further ado, let's dive in. A little coach speak or truth right here on Always College Football. Okay, we'll start at the top. The number 1 ranked team in the AP poll is the Georgia Bulldogs. Kirby Smart continues to mention depth or lack thereof. Here's from Saturday's press conference, and man, that word continues to pop up in his vernacular this offseason.
I feel like we have less depth than we've ever had, and that's kind of a common theme talking to other coaches I talk to. I call it the deterioration of football because every year we've been here, I feel like we've had more players capable of going in and play winning football, and every year that goes down. So we've got to keep working to increase that number.
The deterioration of football? I mean, this is coming from a guy who's got top 5 classes almost every year. All right, any reason for concern, McElroy, if I'm a Georgia fan, about the depth of my roster throughout the season?
So here's what I want everyone to kind of understand. Coaches don't think about, okay, here's what I have. He's not sitting there thinking like, oh, I have a great quarterback. I have great receivers. Like, he knows that to an extent. But coaches are always trained to think in what's going to get me beat. What are they concerned about on their roster? I've learned that from Coach Saban. I've learned that from other coaches. Like, they need to see the blind spots. That's where coaches live. They know, and if you're Kirby Smart, he's not worried about what's going to help win them games. They have a lot of things that can help win them games. He's worried about what are the few things on my roster that could lead to us losing some games. And the biggest problem with what Kirby Smart and Georgia are dealing with is that they don't have competitive depth. And it's not a Georgia problem. It's just a matter of perspective from Georgia's angle. And the reason why I say that is I think, too, look, we all compare Georgia. Let's say you're a fan of Kentucky. You look and sit there and hear Kirby Smart say that, and you're like, well, goodness gracious, cry me a river. Like, you have way more players than we have. You've had way more 5-star talent than we've had. So I'm not really going to lose a lot of sleep over your, quote, lack of depth. But from Georgia's perspective, remember, when you're an elite program, you're not held to the same standard as everybody else. You're held to the standard that's been set by your program. So when you look at Georgia And what Kirby Smart inherited there in 2016 and then 17, 18, the early years of his tenure, they were able to stockpile talent and their depth was experienced. Well, and then the portal came to fruition. And then NIL soon after that. And now guys are not sitting around waiting as backups for an opportunity to play. If a guy's not satisfied in year 3 with his situation, guess what? As a redshirt sophomore, I'm not going to be a backup rotational player at Georgia anymore. I'm going to transfer to another program a la Syracuse and become a potential difference maker right now. And guess what? Yeah, I might be a big fish in a small pond at a smaller school, but NIL, if I'm a big fish, I'm probably going to be paid handsomely as a result of that. So when you look at Georgia this year, their defensive line depth is a huge question mark. They need some guys to get healthy. They've had some guys banged up. Sounds like the secondary has had some real strong progress, but they've been without a few guys on the defensive side. The offense starting to come along as well. So don't listen to Kirby Smart and think, oh, woe is me, Kirby. You still have the best roster in America. If a star player gets hurt, they're likely going to be very young, and that makes most coaches uncomfortable. So I think he's 100% true in telling us, hey, we don't have the depth that we once had because our backups are now leaving to become starters elsewhere. That was not as big of a problem early in his tenure, but now it's rampant, not just with Georgia, but with Ohio State, Bama, and many other programs that attract top-tier talent.
All right, next one comes from Marcus Freeman, who's talking about his offensive line.
Do you think you have a starting offensive line set yet?
We'll have discussions about who's going to be the starting offensive line probably after tonight, tomorrow, as we get into Texas A&M prep. We've been using multiple guys at the tackle, at the guard positions, but we know at some point we got to make a decision and say these are going to be our 5 guys moving forward. We haven't made that decision yet. Okay,
so as a Notre Dame fan, tell me there's not cause for concern on this. I mean, there's a possibility, McElroy, they roll out with a 3-star, 6'4", 290-pound freshman at Texas A&M. What should I be concerned about, or am I just thinking too much about this?
First and foremost, a 3-star is a starting point. I could care less what they were ranked. I saw Chance Warmack as a 2-star. They could have started as a true freshman and would have dominated folks, so it doesn't matter. All right, let's start with where they're at and how they got into this, quote, predicament, right? Well, the left guard and the left tackle spot all camp has been something that we've been watching closely, okay? And then Charles Jagasaw suffered a torn pec less than a week into camp. In steps a graduate student named Tosh Baker, who's big, looks the part, but he hasn't had a lot of opportunities in real live game situations the last few weeks. Last few years. He's got 3 career starts, and he's in year 5. Well, there's been a lot of buzz about an early entry freshman named Anthony Knapp, and there, by all accounts, is a guy that's really impressed throughout spring and is going to ultimately down the road have more upside than what you're going to get with Tosh Baker. So, based on what I'm hearing, it's feeling more and more like they're going to err on the side of upside with Knapp as opposed to the guy that's plug and play that's been around for 4 or 5 years in the program. As far as left guard is concerned, it's been really interesting there. Now, this is in the weeds, so we don't spend a lot of time talking about O-line rotations and things like that. But a redshirt freshman appears to have gotten in front of a redshirt junior, a guy that started 13 games last year at the left guard spot. Then you also have Rocco Spindler, who started 10 games at right guard, that's starting to try to find his way into the mix as well. So it's kind of a 3-way horse race right now at left guard. Sam Bentleton is the redshirt freshman that's been getting number 1 reps ahead of Pat Coogan, who started a bunch of games last year. Now, I think it's going to be really interesting because Coogan was the one guy last year to start all 13 games outside of Joe Alt and Blake Fisher because those guys didn't play in the Sun Bowl. Now, he was considered to be a leader on the offensive line. People have been praising his presence there on the interior and kind of felt like coming into the preseason, he'd be a plug-and-play guy there at left guard. But with the shakeup now going on at left tackle, and with the shakeup that could potentially be going on at guard, I don't blame Marcus Freeman for being concerned. Why? Just watch what Texas A&M might be able to do along the defensive line. Look at who they were last year. Look at the strength of their team. You can make a case with the addition of Nick Scorton, the transfer from Purdue, and with what was already there on campus, that might be the strongest unit on their team. They have depth, they have athleticism, they have guys that can take over the game up front. And if I'm going to run a potential true freshman out there against a guy that might be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft in 6 months, that would be concerning to me as well. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. Do they go with the upside and maybe go young, or do they go with the guy that can probably get them through week 1 without having any significant blowups? That's going to be something that's fascinating to watch, and probably one of the key storylines in that game between Texas A&M and Notre Dame.
All right, we're going to go from South Bend down to Baton Rouge. We're coaching.
Whoa, no one's ever made that move before.
Right?
Go ahead.
You see what I did there?
Makes sense that these two teams would be together.
Right. Well, there's a lot of similarities. And in fact, there's a lot of similarities from what Brian Kelly used to run in South Bend to what he's talking about running a lot of in Baton Rouge.
Without question, I think you'll see 12. I think you'll see 13. I think just watching the scrimmage passively, you can't help but notice 88 and 14.
All right, so 12 personnel, 13 personnel. Any reason for concern for LSU that the offense is going to be drastically different without Jaden Daniels and Mike Denbrock?
Just so we're all on the same page, just so everybody knows what 12 personnel and 13 personnel is. The first, when you hear those numbers, so 12 means there's 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and 2 wide receivers. And you can basically, if you were to hear 21, that's 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 2 wide receivers. If you were to hear 10 personnel, which we saw LSU run a lot last year from time to time, it would be 1 running back, 0 tight ends, 4 wide receivers. 11 personnel, which is really where LSU lived a majority of the last 2 seasons, would be 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. So just so you understand, when you hear 12, when you hear 23, when you hear 13, you hear personnel groupings, that's what that means. So now that we got the college football, NFL football vernacular out of the way, let's talk about what this means for that position group. We all know about the losses at wide receiver from last year, but we also know that LSU feels great about their personnel at wide receiver. So you'd think, hey, you know what? Yeah, we lost Malik Neighbors. Yeah, we lost Brian Thomas. Maybe we won't have as many personnel groupings on the field this year that have 3 and 4 wide receivers because we just lost some great ones and we don't think we can capably backfill those positions. So you'd lean towards, hey, maybe we want to go 2 tight ends more. Maybe we want to go 2 running backs more, what have you. But that's not the case with what's going on at LSU. They feel great about their wideouts, but they feel even better about what they have at the tight end position. And I've always said, I think tight end is one of the most valuable positions on the entire football team. Okay, I'm not putting them in the same category as a game-changing Aaron Donald-esque defensive tackle. I'm not putting him in a category of a Jaden Daniels from last year who went on to win the Heisman Trophy. But the tight end and their versatility can be enormous for the offense here in 2024. Back in the day, the tight end was pretty predictable. But then Jimmy Graham changed things for the Saints. And then Rob Gronkowski changed things for the New England Patriots. The tight end spot now has become so incredibly helpful to the passing attack because they're a matchup nightmare in most cases. You don't want to cover them with a corner because if you cover them with a corner, they're going to run it down your throat. They're going to have a size advantage. They're going to have a strength advantage. And the corner against the run is not going to be as good as the tight end who's blocking the run. You can't cover them with a safety in some cases because the safety isn't fast enough to cover a guy like Mason Taylor who can stretch the field vertically. And you certainly can't cover him with a linebacker because if you cover him with a linebacker, that's a matchup nightmare. Linebackers, for the most part, can't cover great. So if I ever calling plays offensively, or if you are on NCAA Football 25 and you see a linebacker man-to-man against a tight end, throw it to the tight end, all right? It's a cheat code. They can't cover. So all that being said, I think it's really encouraging that Mason Taylor continues to progress. We already know who he was. He's been around for a couple years. But to hear so much positivity about Kamorian Pimpton and freshman Trey-Dez Green tells you that these guys are making plays on a regular basis that you just didn't anticipate at this point of the preseason. Now, it's not surprising. Pimpton's heading into his second camp. I think it's really surprising, though, to see Trey-Dez Green already in a spot where he might be contributing. So don't be surprised whatsoever if LSU rolls out this year against a USC team in week 1 that has struggled in the past against the run. Maybe they get in those heavy sets with 12 and 13 personnel. And from that 12 and 13 personnel, they try to throw it all over the yard because SC will substitute big guys, which are matchup problems against those tight ends. So going to be a fascinating game of cat or mouse, but I happen to think with their personnel at tight end, we're going to see a lot of tight end usage from Brian Kelly and the Tigers this year.
Brian Kelly loves the tight end, so that should be kind of fun to watch. Let's head up to Lincoln. Matt Rule getting ready for year 2.
We're trying to do some advanced things. We're trying to go on to. We're trying to see what you're in and play more NFL style football. And we weren't able to handle that in crucial moments today where we would jump and hurt ourselves. So there's a lot of good things happening way, way further ahead than where we've been. Yet it just isn't to the level we want. We got 2 weeks to buff it out and get it right.
All right. I want to be excited about Nebraska. I don't know if there's cause for concern. I just want to know, what is the ceiling as a fan that could, like, expectation level? Give me hope that they're going to have a winning season for the first time in a very long time.
I feel pretty good about it. Vegas does too. Vegas has in the past too. But I feel really good about the progress that they're making. And Matt Rule right there in his comments, he's talking about going on 2. Going on 2 is a snap count. So it'd be Blue 80 said hut, something along the lines of that. That'd be going on 2. And oftentimes when you got a young team, they're so focused on what play they need to run and what their responsibility is within the structure of the play that was called, that when you go on 2, they often jump off sides, and it's just a detail that kind of goes in one ear and out the other when trying to fire off the football. Going on 2 gives you a massive advantage. And if you can go on 2 and mix up the snap count and things like that, that's really, really beneficial to an offensive line going against some of the pass rushers that they're going to see in the Big Ten. Here's the good news, though. He's talking already about little itty-bitty minute details. What I didn't hear him talk a whole lot about was the fact that the offense didn't turn the ball over in last weekend's scrimmage. That's the first team offense. Now, the second team offense, there were about 4 turnovers, or so we've been told. There have been a few penalties, a few things that have got them behind the sticks, but it sounds like the details that have long kind of gone by the wayside at Nebraska are back in the forefront of a lot of the players' minds, which is huge because they're not going to take the next step. They can't focus on the task at hand and still be able to run the plays that are called both offensively and defensively. And we also, sounds like this week, we're going to find out who the starting quarterback is. I think it'll be Dylan Raiola. Most Nebraska fans believe it's going to be Dylan Raiola. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. But at the same time, I think that it's really encouraging that they're already at the next level. And I know you're going to sit there and think, well, going on 2 is very elementary. It is. In Pee Wee football, we knew how to go on 2 when we were 9 and 10 years old. But it's actually a little bit more advanced than you think. If you become very rhythmic and you take the thinking out of it, then guys can just play fast. So this is kind of the next level of their evolution and being able to focus on the details and things like that. So I remain bullish on Nebraska. I will remain bullish on Nebraska. My expectations for them have not changed. I anticipate 8 wins this year and a team that can be very dangerous when teeing it up against some of the best teams in the sport.
All right, speaking of naming a starting quarterback, Ohio State named Will Howard late last week, and Ryan Day had this to say about him on Saturday.
I think coming off the spring, everything was very new. It was a significant change in terms of scheme and what we ask the quarterback to do. Once he kind of went through the offseason, he changed his body and then came in with a much better knowledge of what was going on. You could see him playing faster, his feet were moving, the ball was coming out with more pace. And then I think after the first week, you just start to see him take control, make good decisions. And that's the biggest thing. I mean, we have a good defense this year, so we don't need, extraordinary play. I did say this at this time last year. We need someone who's going to take care of the football, make good decisions, make the routine plays routinely. He's got to play well on third down. He's got to play well in the red zone and win the game in a 2-minute drill. I mean, that's what we ask our quarterbacks to do.
Is there reason for concern when he says we don't need extraordinary play? And the fact that he compared it to last year, who, as a team, as we know, maybe didn't reach the expectations a lot of people thought.
But why did they lose the Michigan game last year? Because they got gashed a couple times on defense, and they also threw an interception inside their own red zone. I mean, that's why they lost. He just talked about making sure that they took care of the football. He has talked about a guy that values the football, a guy that had great command in the spring, but has taken that next step here in fall camp, a guy that transformed his body over the course of the offseason, because they're probably going to ask a 6'4", 235-pound quarterback to be a contributor in the run game. The guy's got 48 career touchdown passes, which is really, really encouraging, but he also has been really effective running the football. The guy's been very, very solid in contributing in that aspect. And let's be real, Kyle McCord never scared me as an opposing defensive mind with his legs. And I'm not saying that Howard's going to all of a sudden become the next second coming of JT Barrett or the next Tim Tebow in this style of offense. No, we're not expecting that. But I do think there will be opportunities for him to take off and use his legs when the opportunity presents itself. Speaking of legs, Quinshon Judkins was not active in the scrimmage on Saturday, dealing with something minor by all accounts, which allowed Travion Henderson to kind of showcase what he's capable of. And it also opened the door for a potential bigger workload for James Peoples. And his name has been one that I've heard a few things about this offseason, kind of a bright spot throughout fall camp. And in the event in which Quinshon is not at 100% at some point this year, or if Travion Henderson has been banged up. And both those guys, by the way, it's not like they've gone the last several years in college football without bumps and bruises. They're going to get them. It's to be expected. We've seen multiple times back, 2 years ago, when Ohio State had to rely on Dallin Hayden against Maryland because their first 2 or 3 guys were all banged up. It happens. It's the Big Ten. It's a physical brand of football. It's encouraging to know that James Peoples has been presented with an increased share in the preseason and has responded with that increased share. The other thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is that left guard Donovan Jackson has been out for the last week or so. And I know that he didn't take part in the scrimmage. Now, I've been told that the injury is not expected to be long-term, but it could linger into the season potentially. When you look at the non-conference schedule, they can probably get by without him, but you'd like to create that continuity amongst a position group that is a bit of a question mark early in the year against lesser competition. So I think all signs for the offense of Ohio State look really, really solid. And if they need to play keep away, game management, pound the football, use some of the recipe that Michigan's used in success the last few years, I think there's a place to do that with the personnel that they've acquired the last couple of years.
I'm sure Buckeye fans will love to hear use the Michigan recipe. I'm sure that'll sit very well with them.
If it works, who cares what it looks like? Like, I know that there are some fan bases that expect it to look a certain way. Florida's a good example of that. Like, they do not want to win 17-14. They would much rather win 45-42. But at the same time, a win is a win is a win. So I think there's ways that Michigan's recipe the last couple of years can be applied to what Ohio State wants to be this year. You don't have to put so much on the quarterback, so much on the passing game to where you become imbalanced. And I think the hiring of Chip Kelly, the attracting Quinshon Judkins, continuing to really lean in to defensive-oriented football is going to allow this team to continue to grow. And that's why I think they're the best team in the country on paper coming into the season.
All right, let's head down to College Station for a head coach who loves those 17-14 victories. Mike Elko talking about naming starters.
In terms of starting lineup, I think, I don't know that in the positions that are in high-level competition probably go all the way up until kickoff, to be honest with you. I don't know that we're going to formalize those. I think we'll come out of tomorrow and sit down as a staff and try to finalize where a lot of things are. I think that'll probably set 90% of the starting 22, those high competitions, who is the third, fourth, fifth O lineman, who is the true five in the secondary, who is the second backer. I think some of those battles will just kind of continue to go all the way through up until kickoff, to be honest with you.
All right. What do you make of Coach Elko kind of getting his roster together and ready for a daunting season ahead?
Well, I don't have any problems with them being hesitant to naming starters. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of benefit that can be done there because sometimes you name a starter and then the guy who gets beat out goes in the tank and it takes him 6 weeks to recover mentally from not being a part of the first line rotation. I mean, I've seen that a ton of times. Guys go into the tank and all of a sudden they're in the doghouse because they're not doing what they need to do to get back in good graces. So I don't think there's any benefit to naming starters. But here's what I'd like to see from Texas A&M. And I think they're going to be good along the defensive line. We've already established that when talking about Notre Dame a little earlier. I've heard really positive reviews about what I've seen from their secondary. I've heard really positive reviews about some of their young players like Terry Bussey that have had great camps. The one position group, though, that I've continued to hear some concerns about is wide receiver. And if you think, too, about team speed and where they were last year offensively, who's going to be that game breaker? Who's going to be that difference maker in a catch and run situation? Because in the SEC, you're going to have to manufacture some big plays. The defenses that you're going against on a weekly basis, they're not going to allow you to do just 10, 12, 13, 14 play drives right down the field. That's just not going to happen. What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to get it in chunk yardage, and I'm curious who that guy is going to be. I really am. Because I've heard nothing but great things about Noah Thomas multiple off seasons. I've heard that he's supposed to be the go-to guy. He's got all the physical measurables that you can want. He's 6'6". He's one of those guys that even when he's covered, he should still be able to make those contested catches. The problem is he's not super twitchy. So he's probably not going to be a guy that can just run away from you after the catch. Jahdae Walker is a guy that's really solid. And you know that he's going to be where he needs to be. He's going to be able to create a little separation. He can do all those things, but he's not a guy that's going to break a tackle and go 80 out the gate. Moose Muhammad's someone that always seems to be open, and he can make some things happen from time to time after the catch, but he also makes the spectacular play with one-hand catches and things like that, but he's not one of those guys that can be crazy dynamic down the field. The one guy I've continued to hear good things about is Micah Tease, who by all accounts has great burst, has a lot of top-end speed that can create a lot of fear in the opposing defense. So I guess the position group that I'm going to be paying most attention to between now and the start of the game against Notre Dame will be that wide receiver core for the Aggies, because I've heard that it's been somewhat underwhelming, and I've also heard there's been a bunch of inconsistency catching the football as well throughout fall camp. So something to keep an eye on here in the next 12 days.
All right, from one defensive guy to another, we go up to Norman and Brent Venables, talking about Jackson Arnold and the offense going up against an elite defense in practice.
He's been consistent. He's been challenged. Again, the guys he's going against every day, I think, is making not only him but the offense better. And, all three levels of that defense, you have guys that can play for most programs in the country, if not all. And I don't like to anoint people. I think that, we'll see how they play this year. But, we have a chance at all three levels to have an awfully good group, and that's what they are facing. Jackson is facing every single day. We do mostly, again, ones against ones and about everything. So like the progress of the entire offense.
All right. I love a good battle, ones versus ones and everything. But is there any cause for concern about Oklahoma's offense being able to keep up with their elite defense?
No, I think it's great. I can only speak from experience. Every single day in practice when I was in college, I went against the best defense in the country every single day. So that when we were doing our 24 reps, good on good and 7-on-7, it was a real challenge to be able to create consistency in the passing game. It got even more difficult when we're doing good on good at the end of practice, where it's ones against ones and, hey, your best against our best. Let's see what you got. It became highly competitive and sometimes contentious on the field with our defense. We didn't like each other on Monday through Thursday. On Saturday, we loved each other. Everybody loved everybody. But Monday through Thursday, it was a war. It was a battle, and we kept score. No doubt about it. To know that Jackson Arnold is starting to turn the corner, you're hearing some real positive buzz about the last 2 or 3 days being some of his best practices of fall camp. Sounds like the receiver group still trying to kind of get healthy. Doesn't seem like if a guy goes down in that group, they skip a beat whatsoever. They continue to just play at a ridiculously high level. And we've also heard that the defensive line is just wearing out the offensive line from time to time, which puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback to get the ball out really, really quickly and to be decisive if the offensive line is a little banged up and a little inconsistent. So I think it's great to put your young quarterback into the fire as best you can in practice so that when you show up on Saturdays and you're getting ready to tee it up against another team, it won't feel as difficult. I think we all universally agree that Oklahoma's got a top 10 unit on paper defensively with what they bring back and the productivity they had last year at certain positions. But now he's going to be facing teams on a weekly basis that have comparable personnel. Wasn't always the case last year. Whoever was facing Oklahoma's defense, hey, it was going to be by far, probably given the Big 12 and the state of the Big 12, that was going to be the best group they faced on a weekly basis was when they played against each other. That might not be the case anymore because when Jackson Arnold has to play against some of the teams in the SEC, it might be a whole nother level of challenge. So it's great, though, to put your young quarterback in a tough spot because if he has a bad day, it'll kind of build that callus. It'll build that mental toughness, and it'll be really helpful for him because there's going to be outings when he doesn't have his best stuff throughout the course of this season.
All right, and of course, we go from Venables. We have to end up with Clemson here in the last one here. Dabo Swinney, talk a little bit about his defense, which you said, surprisingly, a couple of weeks ago, you had heard wasn't that sharp. Here's what Dabo had to say Saturday.
Much better, much better. We didn't have any offsides, so they did a much better job today. Created a couple turnovers, right out of the gate. First defense. It's good to see, a couple of young guys make some plays today. Again, created a fumble recovery, and then had an interception later, and knocked another one loose. But the offense came up with it, so it's good.
All right, so I guess any reason for concern or doubt that Clemson's defense will be ready week 1 for Georgia?
Well, there is a little bit. I mean, based on what we've heard, is that the offensive line has many times had their way with the defense in the first 2 weeks of camp. That's not usually the case. Usually it's the other way around. The defense is usually ahead of the offense, and then the offense catches up, and then things start to even out as the camp goes along. So it's a little concerning, especially knowing, too, what they're going to be going against in week 1. If Clemson came out of the gate against a subpar opponent, then I'd say they have time. Plenty of time to kind of get things where they need to go defensively. But they play Georgia week 1, and it's going to be a very important game for the perception of their program. Regardless of the outcome, people will draw conclusions on where Clemson is in the hierarchy of college football right now in the event in which that game gets sideways. I don't know if it will. I don't know if it will, if it won't. I don't know any of those things. All I know is their defense needs to be ready to roll. But it sounds like, based on what Dabo told us right there, things are moving in the right direction. And maybe this is a defense that is going to be more opportunistic. Maybe they're a defense that's going to have to press the issue from time to time and create a turnover, because it can't just hold up in the trenches with some of they're a little thin at defensive end. Let's just be real. They're a little thin at a couple spots along the defensive line. Maybe they're not a group that can go 7, 8, 9 deep on the defensive line and just hold up throughout the course of a 15-play drive. That used to be what they do. Maybe that's not this group's identity. So maybe they're going to have to be more opportunistic, more willing to take some risks to potentially turn over the opponent, as opposed to just weathering the storm, bend no break, and make them kick a field goal as the field condenses. The other thing I could say too, it's pretty encouraging with some of the buzz that we're getting out of camp on Cade Klubnik. And who's to say that Cade Klubnik won't be the next in line of great quarterbacks that just took a little while from them to reach their potential. Guys like Joe Burrow, who really didn't reach his potential until his 5th year. Guys like Hendon Hooker, who at Tennessee in his last year had an all-SEC, all-American type of season. There's plenty. Bo Nix reinvented himself when he got out to Oregon. There's a handful of guys whose progress really grew from where they started to where they finished. Jaden Daniels was cast away at Arizona State for the most part, ends up at LSU, wins a Heisman Trophy. So there's a bunch of examples of that. Maybe Klubnik's next in line for a guy that blossoms in year 2 as a full-time starter and gets better from that point forward. Moving into some news and notes, some starters have been announced some places this past weekend. Boise State has officially named Maddux Madsen their starting quarterback. Now, this is pretty significant. It's just the opener. I acknowledge that. And maybe things will change in week 2 and week 3. And we've seen that go back and forth in the past. For instance, like at Michigan a couple years ago, Caden McNamara started week 1, JJ McCarthy started week 2, and then it was JJ McCarthy's show from that point forward, right? So maybe that's what they do, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case right now for the Boise State Broncos. Madsen played in 10 games last couple years. Malachi Nelson is the guy that he was competing against. And if you remember that name, it's because he transferred from SC prior to the spring and was the number 1 overall player, according to ESPN, in the class of 2023. So for Madsen, who at 5'10", 200, brings great familiarity with the offense, his ceiling has not been that of what's been described as a guy that's a can't-miss dude in Malachi Nelson. So it'll be interesting. We know where the offense for Boise is going to run through. It's going to go through star tailback Ashton Jeanty, who led all of college football last year with about 160 yards from scrimmage per game. We know he finished with nearly 2,000 yards last year, so we know it's all going to really run through him, but it sounds like, at least it was interesting to me, I didn't expect it, Madsen's going to be the guy to start the season here in 2024. Louisville, top wide receiver Colin Lacy broke his collarbone, which is really disappointing. He'll be out for an extended period of time right now. That's the actual quote, an extended period of time. Did it in scrimmage last Saturday. He was a big-time addition from the portal, very highly coveted from South Alabama. Had 91 catches for 1,300 yards last year, top 5 in both categories, and he also had 7 touchdowns. So who steps up in his absence? Chris Bell finished second on the team last year. He's back. He'll probably take on a bigger role. And you also have the transfer from Alabama, Ja'Cory Brooks. So that one is interesting and could be significant given what was expected of him heading into the season. But hopefully with a broken collarbone, he'll be out 4 to 6. And fingers crossed he can return at some point this year. Moving on to Oregon. Right guard Matthew Bedford suffered an injury in fall camp and is supposed to be out now for an extended period of time. They say he's expected to be back. Of course, you look at Oregon's schedule, a couple big landmine games on the schedule. You want to make sure that you're at full strength when Ohio State comes to town, and you have some other big challenges built into that schedule as well. So getting in the Indian transfer back at right guard, Matthew Bedford, will be significant. And then finally, Tennessee. A little recruiting tidbit here. We don't often do recruiting here. We're certainly not going to make a habit of doing recruiting, but when the top 5 player commits, and it's the first time they've had a top 5 player commit like this in a while, David Sanders Jr., number 4 overall on the ESPN 300 top 25 of 2025. He is committed to Tennessee, the first number 1 offensive tackle commit since 2017. That was when Trey Smith committed to the Volunteers, and it will be their 4th top 5 ESPN recruit in the ESPN 300 era dating back to 2006. They have 8 ESPN 300 commitments of 2025. So a big land for Josh Heupel along the offensive line in recruiting. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. We appreciate all the support that you've shown us. Continue to tell your friends about the work we're doing here at Always College Football. No frills, fair, honest evaluation of college football. We know that's what you want, and that's what we're here to provide. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.